Where was I? The greatest story ever, right? Okay. I was in college. I used to party at this house in Virginia. And it was out in the mountains. I didn't really party with the guys at school. And what basically happened was, for like about 2-3 years, I would party out at this house, and they never knew that I went to the college I went to. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have hung out with me.
Uh-huh.
And it was just a bunch of like lesbians, and there was a couple fags that hang out there, and they were cool, whatever. And what happened was I met this girl at this party, and within like 5 minutes we were like going at it on the couch.
Uh-huh. You're talking like a northerner.
It's alright.
Okay.
So anyway, she's like, go, like within, oh okay, it gets even better. So the chick starts going down on me within like 10 minutes of meeting her. I'm like, okay. And we're in this dark old like southern house that like, it was like a Fight Club house. There was like no running water. It was fucking weird.
Was she a tranny?
No.
Okay.
No, she was hot as hell, okay? So I'm looking around, and there was like a fire going, you know, and I'm like, I see these beady eyes looking at me, and I look, and there's this guy, and it was Bob. Bob was like some crazy black guy, but he was genius, and he went to like W&L University. He was like some misfit kid, and some professor like hired him, and like he was just weird. Like he would just climb trees. He was this crazy black guy that had a mohawk. I'm like, Bob, I'm like, what the fuck you doing in here? You know? And he's like, oh yeah, you know, I'll just watch, I'll leave. And so instead of leaving out the door, he goes into down south. They have doors, and then they have like transoms above, which is like windows, so air ventilation can come through.
Okay.
So instead of leaving through the door, he climbs up and goes out the transom. That's that. I'm like, okay. She looks at me. She's like, that was fucked up. The girl. Her name was like Sarah something. Sarah D. Maria, I believe. Anyway, so she's like, go find a condom. And I was like on leave from school, from VMI. And like I had like time restraints, and I just didn't realize the time because we were drinking Coors like this. That's what we drank. And
props to Coors.
Yeah. And she's like, go find a condom and meet me upstairs. And I'm like, in Eric's room. And Eric is one of my buddies. I'm like, okay. So I do. I find a condom after like an hour. I'm like going around. There's all these people like doing it on the couch. I'm like, hey, you got a condom? And they're like, yeah, no, it's in my car. And so I finally got one after an hour. I go upstairs in the room, and the girl's in there. And she's like, it's about time. And I'm like, well, sorry. I got one, though. And out from the covers comes this girl, Ashley. And Sarah's like, Ashley's going to join us. And I'm like, this was my time. This was my time. And I'm like, what time is it? And she's like, oh, it's 10:46 or something like that. I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, I have to be back at school because I was on like restriction. And she's like, what school? I'm like, I go to school, you know, college in Lexington. She's like, they're like W&L? I'm like, no. And I'm like, I go to VMI. And they're like, you're a fucking cadet? I'm like, yeah. And I'm like putting on like my white uniform. I'm like, I gotta go. I'm like, can we please do this another time? I'm like, can you please give me a ride back into town? It was like we had a time. It was like 8 minutes from the house in the mountains back to the institute.
Mm-hmm.
And at VMI, if you're late by like 5 seconds, you have to report yourself. And it's the honor code. So I was late by like a minute and 30 seconds. You can come in if you want.
It's okay.
Are you good? Okay. So I was late by like a minute 30 seconds, and I'm like, fuck, I gotta go report myself. You know, I was late for the TAP status check by like a minute and 30 seconds. And when you get like a week later, they'll send something to your room saying, you know, you've been 5-1-5 or some weird shit like this is what penalty you're gonna get. You have to come explain yourself. So I go in front of the commandant, which is like the head, dude in charge, and he's like, and by that time I was like I think a junior or senior. He's like, Scardo, what happened? I'm like, well, I don't wish, I don't really want to tell you, sir. I'm like, I'll just take my penalty. He's like, no. He's like, you're telling me. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, because I was on like restriction, like the football team by some miracle won, and they let everyone in town for a couple hours.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in front of the commandant, like my uniform, and I had like the white pants on and stuff, and I tell him, I'm like, well, sir, I had 2 girls in bed, and I realized the time, and I realized I needed to get back to post, so I put my uniform back on, and I got to post as quickly as I could, and I was 1 minute and 30 seconds late. And he looked at me.
Called you an idiot.
He was like, you dumb motherfucker. I was like, what? I'm like, sir. He was like, you had 2 girls in bed. He's like, and you failed. He's like, just to get back to the post.
Double penalty.
Yeah, and I'm like, sir, I did try to do the responsible thing. Like, I realized the time, and I got back to post as soon as possible. He's like, you dumb asshole. So he opens the door to the commandant's office, and he's like, listen to what Cadet Scarda failed to do.
Nice.
And he's like, basically, he gave me double the penalty. He said you could have been 3 hours late and got the same penalty. That was my my moment of enlightenment. But anyway, this goes on to the next story.
All right.
We're not gonna film this.
All right. What do I hit?
Hit the movie button.